Hi there, good morning. Well, I've had a lie-in today, so that's why it's been a little bit later in getting videos out. Rich is working. I'm collecting her at 3 o'clock. She's got something, she's having to prepare a ward for potential COVID patients. Um, for some reason, I just got half a message, so I can't tell you any more than that at the moment. The um, COVID admissions in this last few weeks have been good. In fact, beginning of this week, just gone, there's only one admission in the week, which is very good. So I'm hoping there's nothing more happening. So perhaps I misunderstood her, or perhaps something else is happening that I'm not aware of, and we're going on the increase. I had a long sleep because I was in bed late last night. I was preparing a report for somebody else, and it just went on a bit. And before I knew it, it was nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. So I got shut eye as best I could. Getting old these days, see, so I can't do it like keep up like I used to. Uh, um, um, what I want to share with you today a little bit is it's sort of carrying on from the South African discussions we were having yesterday, and talk a little bit about opportunities that are really there for South Africa if its main players, be it the government who have got to do a lot of the initiating and leading with this, seize the opportunities to do something about it. Um, when I was involved with the airport here at building the business opportunities with the airport at Prestwick, I also got then contacts from other airport management groups in Europe and in the Middle East, actually, in France, southern France, Montpellier, and Bahrain, who were doing developments. Anyway, while all that was going on, South African Airways were obviously announcing their troubles, which they have been going on for years. Let's face it, they've just been going slowly worse, like everything else in South Africa. And a colleague of mine, close colleague of mine in South Africa, said to me that, oh, by the way, son, because he was working with me on the air freight project, and he said to me he's just heard that South African Airways are going to get rid of their one and only bulk freighter. And I was doing a lot of work with air freight, international air freight throughout the world, and looking at the main players that are out there. So I gave it some thought, and I thought to myself, well, hang on, South Africa are a pantry of product opportunities uh, that they are sending to the Middle East, they're sending to the States, they're sending to Europe and the UK. Plus, I knew, although it hadn't been announced at that stage, I knew the likelihood of the UK leaving the EU in the future was more than likely, high potential it was going to happen. So I saw South Africa as a supplier to our, particularly our fruit needs, soft fruit needs, fresh food needs, fresh meat, fresh fish, etc. as well. And I wrote to the MD of the then MD, I can't remember his name now, or CEO of South African Airways, to talk to him to get confirmation on this move he was making with air freight, because he was going to get out of bulk air freight altogether. He would just supply air freight on passenger planes, which is, look, majority of air freight does travel on passenger planes, but if you've got a source, you want to have bulk air freight to also move that source to a central hub to get it out. So I was making reference to that more than anything else, and basically saying, look, it's an opportunity for the economy of South Africa to seize, but it's going to rely on bulk freight out of that world into Europe, into US, into certain parts of the sea core hubs of the world. Now, I was also aware that there are many other players out there who could do it and do it well and are doing it, like Emirates, Sky Cargo, etc. But I was thinking of, this is something that South Africa could control themselves, because the products are sitting in South Africa, the resources to actually to be, they're producing it, they're in control of it, so they can actually make an established business decision on who should carry it for them. It's theirs. I was making these points to the CEO, and he wrote back to me, actually, quite a pleasant letter, but basically telling me that he didn't agree with me. He didn't agree with my thinking. He made the point, which was correct, that a large proportion of international air freight goes in the passenger holds of aircraft, and for that reason he didn't see a need for his bulk freighter. And the point I was making is, with the bulk freighter, he was owning his pantry, his resource, and he could then use several air hubs to get the bulk of his merchandise to, without using an outsider's aircraft to do it all. But he didn't agree with me, and I thought, well, he's wrong. But anyway, as it turns out, it's just got from bad to worse. He lost, the situation is, it was with South African Airways. They just haven't got that resource at all now. But it got me thinking about it after that other video I sent out yesterday. It also got me thinking more about what people must be thinking in South Africa, those that are on the step of exiting South Africa, unsure what to do, how to do it, where to go, how they should handle it. Because like any step, when you're, and I cannot imagine what it must be like. I mean, I've emigrated several times to different parts of the world, but I've done it not through pressure or through risk or through, I've made choices, sort of commercial choices and family choices, to make certain moves that have been enjoyable. And I've always, now I've got the UK that I can always go back to as my home. So it was never, I wasn't sort of thinking, oh, I'm never going to see the UK again. I always knew it was there. If it wasn't going to work out for me in South Africa or in the Middle East or wherever I was going, I've always got a home in the UK. So it's difficult for me to actually imagine that I'm, here I am leaving my country, my home country, and I won't be coming back because the country's fallen to bits. It's in pieces. It's just a non-entity anymore. It's no longer safe to live in the country. It's no longer safe to bring my children up in the country. It's no longer safe to keep my money or equity in the country. The whole country has fallen foul, fallen flat. There's nothing going on. And I just thought to myself, I can't imagine how it must feel to be in a situation like that, where you actually see your life savings going down the tubes. You're becoming more and more valueless by the day in terms of your equity. You're probably more and more at risk with your life every day, the longer you stay there, and in some cases with some people. And I thought to myself, that's one heck of a burden to carry on your shoulders. And I can understand people are getting out because of their futures and the futures of their children. So older people who have seen the best, but when I say older people, people my age, have lived in the best times of South Africa and have the memories of the best times. People who are struggling with this more than ever, I suppose, are people in their 30s and 40s at this moment in time, that are in their prime years, that are going to be giving up careers, businesses, whatever, for an unknown future. And of course there are people my age there as well who have just seen their pensions dwindle away to nothing, I suppose, and are looking at safety and are looking at, well, if they move, then it will bring the family along with them. It's a hell of a tough thing to do, and there's no right or wrong way of doing it, and there is no right call to say, well, I'll stay there because it's my home and my family have lived here for centuries, therefore I'm staying here through thick or thin, or to go. And if you're going to go, where are you going to go? I know a lot of South Africans look at Australia and New Zealand in particular, and I can understand why. They're New World countries and they have the right sort of climate, outdoor environment, New World sort of environments, and speak English, and possibly there's a lot of other home comforts of sorts that are there in terms of other South Africans that are there as well. The UK and European countries, well, obviously UK and Ireland and Wales and Scotland, we all speak English of a sort, but we are more the old world. We are in the northern hemisphere, and we're a much colder climate. But yes, it's also, I know of few South Africans who've made the move to the UK as well. Some have settled in very well and adopted to it. Others have found it very difficult and have gone back to South Africa. But I think the same has applied to people who've gone to Australia as well. They've gone back to South Africa. The world's out there, actually. You don't have to, it's more than 3 or 4 countries you can consider. There's many countries you consider. I know a South African family that are living in Dubai that have made the move there. Now, that's got its complications as well, because Dubai's or UAE there are restrictions as a foreigner living in Dubai. Yes, you can own a property of sorts with a contractual arrangement of sorts, but it's not the same as living in the free world, as it were. It's very difficult, and it's extremely difficult when you're making decisions under haste, under pressure. I love South Africa. I mean, I love the open spaces, I love the people, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time in South Africa, work and pleasure and lifestyle and everything that went with it. Then, yes, I know it had its issues, problems as it were then, but every country has got its problems of sorts. When you go into a country, there are underlying issues with any country you go to. They've got their Achilles heel, as it were. But South Africa's a particular case now. It's a crisis. It's a country in total crisis that's not going to come out of it. We don't see a future. So you're either going to find a little corner in South Africa in the country or somewhere where you can get your head down, and it's not hope it's not going to hit you or touch you, or you've got to get out, haven't you? I mean, that's the options. Or you've got to adapt to the way of thinking of the main players that are running South Africa, and that's a pretty difficult thing to do, black or white. I think it's very difficult to come to terms with what the ANC are doing as anything good for anybody. One thing it's very important, when you move out of South Africa, yes, take what possessions you can take out of the country with you, of course, but and obviously you'll take your memories with you, but try not to take South Africa to Australia or New Zealand or the UK or anywhere, Dubai, because that tends to create unhappiness. Be prepared for the first 18 months to 2 years to be quite tough while you're making the shift in your way of life and how things work. Accept the fact that it is going to be difficult for that first 18 months, 2 years, while you're adjusting, while you're getting used to, while you're learning, because it isn't going to be the same as what you may expect. Some of it might be better, some of it you'll be pleasantly surprised, some of it you may be a little bit disappointed with, but you've got to give yourself that time frame to get adjusted to that new way of life. Don't fall into the trap of sort of, how can I say it, particularly if you've got a lot of other South Africans with you that have moved over similar time frames and you're living in a community. I'm thinking in Australia, for example, and you've found yourself in a little community with other South Africans that they're all there for the same reason you're there. What tends to happen is you tend to think back on the good old times of South Africa and why you're there now, why you're in Australia now, and you become negative to the whole situation around you. You'll, and that doesn't apply in Australia, it can apply anywhere for that matter. So you must try not to retreat into your past. Obviously, think about keep the fond memories, and don't forget about your past, but try not to live in your past, especially in those early years of trying to adjust to your new way of life. I mean, that's something you've got to overcome. I found when I went to South Africa as a young man, and I went out there with a load of other UK recruits, and some of them kept themselves very much together as themselves, and they were very critical of things, very critical of the way their company was being run, very critical of certain people, very critical. They're more negative about things, and of course they were not talking very positive about where they were, and they were missing the past, and they didn't last. I mean, they may have lasted 6 months, 8 months, but they all gradually went back. Because I was so young, I was younger than a lot of the group that came out with me, so I tended not to mix with them. Found it tough more on my own, but gradually got into the South African society and had more South African friends. So it was tough, but it was a route that got me forward, and I've got to say it's one of the happiest times in my life was being in that time frame in South Africa in those years. But I learned from it as well. So when I made my next overseas move, big one, not so much when I was in Poland, but when I went to Kuwait and then on to UAE, and then I knew how to manage the stresses of making those moves into those new countries, and how to adapt to them, and how to respond to people who are having difficulty in those countries, adjusting. And it became much easier. So like now moving to the Philippines. Well, I've been to the Philippines many, many times already. So, and Rich is my wife, and she's from the Philippines, and I've got family in the Philippines. So I don't even regard it as any sort of pressure. It's just other than the physical move of actually having to do it, but it's no more than that these days. But I'm going back to the point. I can understand how stressful it must be for South Africans who have spent their whole life in South Africa. Their world has always been in South Africa. Their memories are all in South Africa. And they're having to stand on the side now and say, I've got to make this step outside. Am I doing the right thing? Where should I be stepping to? Where should I be going? How should I be going there? What should I be doing? How can I? It's a tough one. It's a very, very tough call. I can remember when I went to South Africa back in 1980, it was the time of the Rhodesian Zimbabwe situation, when a lot of the Rhodesians were coming out of Rhodesia, and it was changing. The change had come, and they weren't allowed to take anything out of the country, or very little out of the country. They had to leave their assets and most of their equity in the country. I think they were allowed to buy a caravan if they were driving out of the country, and a lot of them did. They bought caravans and they put in what household goods they had and memoirs and things, and moved out that way, left everything else there, and drove down to South Africa. Now, what I found with a lot of that, a lot of them they kept themselves to themselves, as the what do they call them, the Wenwees or whatever, and they became also to an extent negative in the new environment they were in, this home they were choosing in South Africa. And some stayed in South Africa, some went to other African countries, and some went further afield as well. But they were there at the end they had no choice. They were forced into that situation, and they had to do it that way. Now South Africans are finding themselves now, they're not quite in that position yet, but it's getting closer and closer by the day. And they're looking over their shoulder all the time. And they're looking down at the grandchildren or the children, and they're saying, what are we going to do? What should we do? And it's one of those difficult things to try and get, because it's a very unique scenario. It's like a bit like being a refugee in many respects. It's like being someone who's coming out of Syria. Several 100,000 people are walking out of Syria because they've just been bombed to hell, and they all end up in refugee camps, either on the Turkish border or whatever, but get forgotten to a large extent by first world countries. They don't want to know about them. But yes, we'll supply aid. It's the way of dealing with it. This is similar on a smaller scale, but it's a tough one to get your mind around when you're not a South African. And I'm trying to explain this to people that aren't South Africans at the moment, as well as the South Africans. For those of you that aren't South Africans, think about it. Think about what it must feel like to be in a position where you're forced out of your country because you feel there's no future. You've got to go for your own safety, the safety of your family, safety of your children, grandchildren. But you're not 100% sure where you're going to go to. Should you go to Australia because my neighbour went there? Should I go to London because my neighbour went there? Should I go to some? That's the scenario. Not a nice situation to be in if you're looking at it from the outside even. As someone who's lived in South Africa and lived in the UK and lived in the Middle East and Far East, I can I can certainly help the process of breaking down the issues, the potential opportunities, the potential solutions, where one may find better help and advice, what there is in certain places to live that you may not be aware of, that may benefit you or your family. What would be best in your own personal circumstances. I'm happy to help anybody from South Africa who wants some advice. Yeah, quite happy to just hear what the frustrations are and where I might be able to help focus someone on the right country to go to. I'm always willing to help. Okay, and that's just help if I can. I'm not saying I'll get it right 100%, but I might be able to help and push you in a direction that you possibly hadn't thought of going in. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. What I do see is there's no point in sitting out, really, unless you are already my age, retired, got a place, and you're just going to board yourself up in that place and be okay because you know your kids and grandkids are already living overseas and they're happy there, and you can go and see them when you want, and you're going to be in South Africa and put up with the shit because you've been there long enough to know what it is, and you don't have to worry about your future so much as your family's future, and they're already out of there. I mean, that I can understand as well. But yeah, I can certainly listen and can certainly try and help and give some advice on things for, things against, places that you might like to consider that haven't come on your radar yet, and just be a friendly voice to hear back from, and can certainly do things if there's anything you want me to find out. Talk to you again soon. Bye bye.